Okay, I'm here to review the top 10 movie trends of the decade, the ones that took me the most. And like all trends, they have their roots in years and decades previous, but they really came to prominence in the 2000s decade. And these are trends that I have to read out from a script in a way.
Let me ask you, are they ranked? Is there some sort of
I rank them just so there's a 10. Yeah, there's a ranking.
Okay.
There's a ranking in the idea that their prominence, their importance, and where they'll be taken into the next decade in a way.
All right.
Number 10, TV teaches movies a thing or two. The parts are still there. They're just on smaller screens. Martin Sheen, Charlie Sheen, Kiefer Sutherland, Glenn Close, William Hurt, Gary Sinise, Holly Hunter, James Spader, Kira Sedgwick. These are just a few of the actors who have had their own successful TV series. And the TV movie used to be the kiss of death, but now that's all changed, especially if you're HBO, where they get talents like Pacino and Streep and Spacey and Thompson and directors like Scorsese and Michael Mann, and how even Tarantino got into the CSI business. So that career-deadening stench that was once associated with TV is no longer relevant, and as a result, I ask you guys, have our movie stars gotten smaller? Or is it just a question of the level of good writing in TV as opposed to the weakened writing in film?
A really interesting question. In fact, I'm surprised that this, as a theme, is not higher. I know that Bill Simmons, the sports guy on ESPN, and Chuck Klosterman were having a conversation a couple months ago thinking about the decade in film, and that was sort of the conclusion that they came to finally, was that film, really, this decade was sort of overshadowed by television, by shows like The Sopranos, by shows like Lost and 24 and things like this. It's really kind of amazing the steps that TV has taken. And what it says about film, I don't know, because we've talked about this before. I still feel like there's just as many good movies made every year, but I feel like there's more good television shows. And certainly film could learn a lot from some of the serials.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean, the police procedurals and, the sitcoms, nothing's changed there, but the serial shows have really, really taken it to another level.
Totally.
Well, this probably should be higher if you think about relevance. These are just things I've been taken by, but it goes beyond this. There's a different level of intimacy when you watch an actor on the big screen as opposed to the small screen, and that's just it. You feel intimate with them when you watch them at home. But there's also another thing related to TV, and it's been there years previous to the 2000s decade, but really came alive this past decade, which is a lot of people are going to the movies to watch TV more and more.
How do you mean?
Well, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Dukes of Hazzard, Sex and the City, Bewitched, The A-Team coming out this summer. I mean, there's... And you understand why, because they're built-in brands. There's a familiarity and a comfort there that people will go see some of these things. Yeah. They sell themselves in a way.
Yeah.
And I've seen more and more of that this past decade.
Yeah, it's not necessarily always a good thing. In fact, often it's a very, very bad thing. But you got to wonder, in years to come, will we be seeing a Sopranos movie? Will we be seeing a Lost movie? Will we see a 24?
And they want to make all of that, except Sopranos. But
they're doing it quicker and quicker. We're seeing Sex and the City movies. We're seeing Simpsons movies, Family Guy movies. It's happening quicker and quicker.
Jackass.
So you're right.
I mean, Jackass, reality TV put on the big screen. So are we going to see I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, the movie?
The Jersey Shore movie? How about that?
Right.
I feel so out of it because I've never watched Jersey Shore, so...
Wow.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question, Jamie, and I think it's really, really... I'm really excited to hear the rest of the list now because I find it difficult to believe that there's an issue that is stronger than that.
Well, forget that because it won't be. So forget that expectation.
Well, then it's a great opening conversation then about
it is.
My number 9 is the musical is reborn, but is the genre already singing its swan song? Sure, Disney succeeded in the 90s with a string of music-filled animated features, but what about the return to good old big Hollywood musical spectaculars? Crybaby and Newsies might have gained some level of cult status, but it failed to ignite the mainstream. Evita came closest in 96, but failed to recoup its $55 million budget. But this was the decade that opened with Moulin Rouge, a very unexpected and curious mainstream phenomenon if there ever was one. And then came Chicago, a Best Picture winner, and a formidable financial success. The genre looked to be on the rise. Then, mid-decade, we saw Rent, Phantom of the Opera, and The Producers. And was the decade ending 9 the final nail in the coffin? Apparently not, because a movie called Burlesque is on its way, featuring that dynamic thong-wearing duo of Christina Aguilera and Cher. And like most trends, Hollywood has found a way to capitalize on the surprise return of the big-screen musical and exploit it right back into a coma. Do you think musicals are dead again, is my question.
Oh, or a better question, should they make Dead Again the musical? Oh. No, I won't say no. I'll say yes for right now. Because someone could have asked that question in the early 70s, and everyone would have said, well, yes, musicals are dead. But it's one of those things where eventually we'll get another Moulin Rouge. But it is an interesting question because, yes, I do think for right now they're dead. And I don't think this Burlesque movie has a chance. Once again, 9, and I haven't seen 9, but would 9 be different had it come out before Chicago? Or is Chicago just a better movie? I don't know. I didn't like Chicago. Musicals are not my thing, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't think this is the kind of thing that ever goes away, and I'll tell you why. Women love musicals. I mean, I don't know what it is, but they love musicals. I mean, and by the way, wait till Hugh Jackman makes a musical.
That's it.
You know,
yeah.
Yeah, and there's plenty of other Broadway shows that are always coming out that will turn into someone will turn them into a movie, and it might not happen this year, might not happen next year, it might be another 10 years. But musical is just a genre that I have a hard time counting out.
It did have a surprise return this past decade, and it was a surprise because they've been dead a long time. But what's most interesting to me, and there's a couple that fall into this category on this list, is the last thing I said. They have a formula. They're like, oh, musicals are making money again. Let's flood them with a bunch of musicals, most of which will suck. And that killed them again, I think. Hollywood is its own worst enemy, in a way.
That's
for a lot
true.
of these trends. Yeah. This is another trend. Number 8, mainstream audiences get a craving for porn, or at least the torturous kind. Remember the days when the rampages of horror villains like Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers seemed quaint? Now, thanks to a little behemoth known as the Saw series, those days are gone. With few exceptions, this was the decade that produced horror films that were only concerned with one goal, one-upmanship. My movie's more disgusting than your movie. Horror has always played in the controversy sandbox, but in the 2000s, that same spirit produced huge sums of money the horror directors of old could only dream about. Of course, this wasn't the only horror trend this past decade. If we didn't take our scares from pornographic scenes of torture, Hollywood seemed to think we'd want them with an Asian slant. No pun intended.
Oh, God damn, Jamie, I didn't think of that.
Where is the horror genre? Where's it going?
Well, once again, I'm glad you did this list because it raised some really interesting questions here. I do think that the torture porn thing is dead. Like,
it's gone.
You can't pronounce the musical dead, but I do feel like we can pronounce the. That's not to say there won't be any more torture porns made, and it's also not to say that there won't be another good or successful one. I just don't think that it will become a trend again. Because it came and went so quickly. We were sick of it by the time the second and third Saw movie came around and the second Hostel movie. And by the way, there's really no further to go. Like, there's really, like, how much grosser can you get? We've seen a circulating Saw grind to a halt in a girl's skull. Like, we've seen
you know what's going to happen? What is very interesting. That's just it. How much farther can you go until people get sick of it? And I think that we've reached that point, and I think that we've seen the other side of it, too. You revert. You revert back to showing nothing alluding to everything, and that's why Paranormal Activity is such a huge success.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think the trend has run its course, but I think that it is a strange trend, especially on the heels of 9/11, where we've just had to have it, and the fact that morality is tied up with this, the fact that Jigsaw in many circles is seen as a character that represents the morality of the piece, even though he's the perpetrator of all this torture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is another
horror
point.
movies as a genre are interesting because as the decades have gone on, they have had sort of subgenres that overtake the genre itself, and really sort of last the whole decade. In the 80s movies, it was the slasher movie where the villain was this sort of supernatural force, whether it was Michael Myers or Jason or Freddy Krueger, and that sort of lasted that whole decade. In the 90s, really kind of kicked off in the mid-90s with Scream. You had the teenage thing going on where, there was a killer out to get a bunch of kids, and we really probably saw 25, 30 movies that were essentially exactly like that, and they were all very popular, from Final Destination to Urban Legends and Scream movies and all this kind of shit. And then this decade, it was the torture point movies. There were exceptions in every decade, but in the last 3 decades, we've seen these sort of subgenres that overtake the genre itself. So who knows where the next trend in horror movies is going to be, but the thing is, in every year, horror movies is something there's a huge audience for.
Is it
and they
3D?
don't always, and they're not the easiest audience to fool, really.
No, they're not.
They're uniquely qualified to appeal to something primal in the culture itself and comment upon it without hitting you over the head with a hammer. Which a lot of these movies have those scenes. Yeah. Oh, you saw House of the Devil.
Oh, loved it.
That's the movie with the 80s that feels like it was made in the 80s that I was talking about.
Yeah, it really does. It's a really interesting movie. I don't know. I can't remember the name of the director off the top of my head.
Ty West.
Ty West. Yeah, he is somebody to watch because that was a fun movie. That was a really, really fun 80s movie or 80s type horror movie. And maybe it's because I was raised in the 80s and I love the 80s and all that kind of shit. But I just thought it was a really fun horror movie to watch, and I enjoyed the hell out of it. And I watched it by myself, and I just enjoyed the hell out of it. So
I did too. I'm glad you watched it, dude. Number 7, raunch sells, especially when it comes from the heart. For some frame of reference to this phenomenon of the past decade, look a little further into the past. Take Porky's and mix it with a little John Hughes, and you've got the sensibilities of Judd Apatow, who wrote and directed The 40-Year-Old Virgin and Knocked Up, which mined this formula beautifully. These were 2 of the raunchiest films in the year they were released, but also 2 of the most touching. And then we have Funny People, which made the mistake of straying from Apatow's winning formula, and ironically, wasn't funny. Maybe we saw this trend coming in 1998 when Cameron Diaz moosed her hair with The Seed of Man, but in terms of raunch, nothing compares to this decade, the decade that brought us Van Wilder's delicious pastries filled with dog semen, Jason Biggs supergluing his hand to his penis, and Will Ferrell playing the drums with his balls. And now we have The Hangover, which soon might breathe the rarefied air of Oscar nominee. What do you guys think of this whole subgenre of comedy now?
Wow. I will say this. I think Bradley Cooper's finest hour may be The Hangover. Just looking at I didn't realize all these other films that he was in that I had seen. I didn't notice him in, but that he is the unsung hero of The Hangover. I know a lot of people want to say Zach Galifianakis, but he's really, I think, the breakthrough performance in that film. But I think you're right. This whole decade has been reaching up. You had to bring up the Step Brothers, didn't you?
It mirrors horror. Like, how far can we go?
You had to bring up the balls on the drum set.
Yeah, but how far can we go? How shocking can we go until we've reached that plateau? Yeah.
Well, I do think there's a difference, though. When you've seen a circulating saw grind to a halt in a girl's skull, you don't ever want to see it again. A guy whipping out his balls on a snare drum is always funny. It's always funny. It's always going to be funny. And especially, strangely, The Hangover is a great family movie. And I say that maybe because my family has a sick, twisted sense of humor. I don't mean the kind of movie you take your kids to. I mean the kind of movie
of course.
The kind of movie that adults go with their adult parents to go see. It's the kind of movie that really is such a fun time to go see with other adults. It's obviously not for children. Neither was There's Something About Mary. Neither was Animal House or any of these gross-out kind of movies.
Oh, Animal House?
I don't think these kind of movies, I don't think this will go away.
They have values, though, which is what's so fascinating about them. They shock, they disgust in the service of laughter, and there's genuine laughter in these movies. But they all have heart. They all have values. They value friendship. They value family and love and all. You feel that in these movies.
Yeah, and the ones that don't have that don't work.
No, they don't work at all.
Like Van Wilder, for instance. I know some people love that movie, but I don't think it has that kind of moral grounding that some of these, that 40-Year-Old Virgin has, that Hangover has, that There's Something About Mary has. I don't think it has that, and therefore it doesn't have the kind of weight. It didn't become the kind of phenomenon that those other three movies did.
Yeah. All right, our number 6. Professional critics are a dying breed. As more and more newspapers go under, and even the giants in the publishing business suffer from the financial pinch in a changing internet-driven landscape, so have gone the careers of countless film critics, as they are usually among the initial victims of the chopping block. These critics include Premier's Glenn Kinney, USA Today's Mike Clark, Newsweek's David Ansen, the New York Daily News' Jack Matthews, and the Chicago Tribune's Michael Wilmington, just to name a few. Now, several of these high-profile critics have turned to writing criticism in the blogosphere, where they are joined by every Joe Schmo with a keyboard and an opinion, most of which are underdeveloped and sophomoric, but some of them are actually exemplary voices of criticism and utilize the forum brilliantly. Many newspapers and magazines have declared the value of the professional film critic with their pink slips, but what is their value to the culture and our society at large, and are we a poorer society without them?
Yes. We always need Roger Ebert. We always need someone out there who is writing, and it's just like any form of literature, really. We're going to be at a great loss when Stephen King dies. We're going to be at a great loss when Roger Ebert dies. Now, I know we're not talking about people dying here, but in Roger Ebert's case, we're actually talking about both.
I agree with Chris there. I mean that partially as a joke, and I mean that partially in all sincerity. Because when Glenn Kinney no longer has that job, he is in the blogosphere among all those schmoes, and he doesn't have that megaphone that he used to have. And he's a good writer, and maybe he should still have that megaphone.
Roger Ebert will not be unemployed, and there will always be an AP.
It is cheaper. Unemployed.
It is cheaper for. It is cheaper for them to syndicate their writings than it is to hire film critics of their own, and that's what we're going to see.
Yeah.
But even that, I mean, that's going to ultimately you're going to see fewer and fewer voices.
Yeah.
And if you have fewer and fewer voices, then you're not going to get a chance to have that one defining voice. And for the last 20 years, that defining voice, ever since Cale died, or stopped writing, I should say, Roger Ebert is that voice. And I don't know that anyone really can argue with that.
No, I can't.
His writing is really important to film.
Yeah.
And more
you
more
said
so
the writing,
than
and that's important. You said the writing, not the TV show so much, but it's like it's him, it's Manohla Dargis, it's Kim Morgan, it's Glenn Kenny, David Thompson. There are a couple of critics that are definitely, keeping, letting us know, hey, maybe we're not looking at everything. There's a foreign film, there's an independent film that deserves a look.
Yeah. And also, and also exposure to critical thought, I think is important.
Oh, very important.
And guys and girls, writers who don't have an agenda. And unfortunately, in the blogosphere, there's just way too many people that have an agenda, and it's perfectly obvious when you read their criticism. When you read Roger Ebert, you do not ever get the impression, I've never once read his work and got the impression that he has an agenda. And
he wants to love the
writers out there like that.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to look at his review for The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. He really liked The Phantom Menace. He hated Attack of the Clones. And while that's not a great example to use, I just think just to show he doesn't play favorites, he was willing to really attack Lucas to say you really dropped. I mean, I would have said he dropped the ball with Phantom Menace, but at least Ebert was like, okay, you dropped the ball with this one. And I think that's a good example to use in Ebert's case.
We got 15 minutes to run through the rest of these.
Right.
Number 5, is the independent spirit of the 90s dead or just mutating? The cinema of the 90s, if nothing else, solidified the era of the independent film movement. The groundwork laid by Soderbergh's Sex, Lies, and Videotape, the flowering of Miramax, and the increasing relevance of Sundance raised hopes for the prominence of a different kind of movie. Perhaps the movement's biggest blessing and its biggest curse was Pulp Fiction, a thunderbolt to the industry that wound up grossing over $100 million. This got the studio thinking there was a lot of money that could be mined from these outside-of-the-box films. In the past decade, most of these big studios started their own specialty film divisions or bought the established ones outright. I mean, were there ever stranger cinematic bedfellows than Miramax and Disney? Today, that landscape has changed as Disney has scaled back Miramax considerably. Paramount has closed Paramount Vantage. Time Warner shut down Warner Independent, as well as Picture House, and absorbed New Line into Warner Brothers. And Universal sold Rogue, their specialty division.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there could be a couple of reasons why. Maybe there are too many films. Most indie films are just as bad as the big studio films. Or maybe it's the reasoning that the studios give, that there's no longer room for medium-sized pictures, not when you can make a $200 million movie and gross $1 billion from it, or when you can buy the $15,000 Paranormal Activity and gross over $100 million on it. They're not in the business of making $20 to $40 million movies anymore.
Right. That's why The Brothers Bloom got buried.
Yeah.
You asked that question earlier, that's the answer. It's a medium-sized movie. And there's just no place for movies like that anymore. That's done.
Yeah.
Number
4. Sorry. Go ahead. Did you have something?
All I was going to say is that this is the first question you've raised that really there's no answer to.
Yeah, there's no answer. Not one that I could give to get us off the air in time. So no.
But it is happening. I mean,
yeah, it is. You're right.
Number 4, never forget 9/11, although in respect to the movies, sometimes we should. It's become the defining event of this generation, but how has it manifested itself into the movies? After an initial period of great trepidation, we were given the most brilliant of all films to deal with the tragedy of 9/11, the Paul Greengrass masterpiece United 93, which was followed by the disappointing World Trade Center, the Oliver Stone film with the Ron Howard personality, and then Fahrenheit 9/11, of course. And we have the films that deal with the after effects of that event, mainly the new age of war films, which vary in quality and resonance. But what interests me most are the films on the fringes, the ones that don't deal directly with 9/11, but the experiences of that devastating day are embedded in their bones. Spike Lee's 25th Hour is the shining example of this, one of the great films of the decade, and really the first film out of the gate to express the post-9/11 mentality. Spielberg's War of the Worlds was a mixed bag, but there were haunting images that immediately recalled the chaotic horrors of that day. But oftentimes, I think it's not the films that reflect 9/11 so much as the audiences themselves, because we see buildings crumble and explosions rumble, and we can't help but draw the parallels in our own minds. Our perception is even colored when we watch Drek like 2012.
There's one film that does it really well, and it has nothing to do, and it takes place chronologically long before 9/11, and that's Fincher's Zodiac.
Yeah,
that's really
that's another thing.
9/11 film.
That's another thing. There are a series of films where we read 9/11 into them, and I don't know that in all cases if it's intentional on the filmmaker's part.
It might not be for that one, and it's his film, and he can certainly disagree. But I do think there's a level of fear, like the fear of when those to leave your house, your apartment, or whatever in the city because of killers at large. That does manifest itself into what it was like after the immediate months after 9/11. People were scared to do anything.
Audiences,
but I don't know if he had that in mind. I don't know.
Audiences, their perception has changed in a very insidious way, in a way that I don't think they're aware of. And I don't know if that translates into what they choose to go see. Do they choose to go see the dumbest possible movie? Do they make Paul Blart a $120 million movie because they want to put their brain on stupid because of the world that they're living in?
That's a good point.
I think it's true. You know what the first #1 movie after 9/11 was?
Zoolander. Yeah. Yeah.
Zoolander. Nothing could personify that topic that you're talking about more than Zoolander. And I love Zoolander. I think it's
silly,
comedic
funny
gold.
movie.
In fact, that is one of those movies that was on my top 20. That movie is one of the best movies of the decade, in my opinion. But it resonated that week more than it would have. Strangely, 9/11 helped Zoolander.
Yeah.
People wanted to just go have a good time, and I do think that sentiment has lingered. I think that's definitely lingered. We've seen a dumbing down. Paul Blart would have been a direct-to-VHS movie in 1999.
Yeah, let me bring up...
We would not have seen it.
Yeah, a good friend of our show, who was one of our first guests, Jeremy Samos was on, he mentioned Cloverfield. Cloverfield may be probably one of the best post-9/11 movies to really deal with the hysteria and the fear and everything. And that's a really good film to bring up.
It is, but it doesn't have to talk about it directly. And I'm also curious, when will a movie be brave enough to talk about it directly in the big picture, just not a minutia feel-good story like what you have with World Trade Center? When will there ever be an immersive, all-inclusive 9/11 movie?
Yeah, there will be. But it's hard to imagine who will make it and when it will happen.
Yeah,
but
it's so politicized right now, though.
It is, but look how long it took to get that Vietnam movie. You know, I mean, it took.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right, Chris.
It took 15 years till we got Platoon, which is really. I mean, I know we had Coming Home and we had Apocalypse Now, but again, those movies sort of dealt with it indirectly. Platoon was the first movie that said, "Here it is, deal with it."
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably going to be 15 years. It's probably, in the next 5 years, we'll probably see that movie.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3. We've come a long way from Jar Jar. One day, flesh and blood actors will become obsolete, only to be replaced by the imaginings of a tech geek sitting in front of a workstation. At least that was the fear when George Lucas lashed Jar Jar Binks onto the world with The Phantom Menace. But now, given the efforts of trailblazers like Peter Jackson and James Cameron, Misa no thinks so. We'll be seeing a lot more computer-generated characters in the future. And the good news is that they will require the physicality, and as seen in the bar-raising movie Avatar, the emotionality of actors to work. If anything, I think this could mean more opportunities and braver performances from actors. But organizations like the Academy will have to face a decision. Should these performances be recognized alongside real-world performances?
Only if they deserve to be. Only if they deserve to be. That's the best way I can say it. And frankly, I think they deserve to be a long time ago. I think Andy Serkis deserved to be recognized for the Lord of the Rings movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think
agree.
what he did in that movie was more important than what Avatar did, really. And I think, and James Cameron himself has said it. When they saw Gollum, they said, "Okay, it's time. We can do it now." And and frankly, I don't think that there has been a performance like that is CGI motion capture since Gollum. Like maybe Zoe Saldana in Avatar, she's quite good, and Sam Worthington is also. But I don't think there's been anything like Gollum. So when they deserve to be recognized, yes, they should be. But it's strange
a hurdle
because it's what now?
It's a hurdle. I mean, the perception of these people, they really have to let them know this is all acting. This is all the actor's doing, because it is a hurdle, the perception of it.
Absolutely. And
You're
it's
right.
weird because I'm thinking about somebody like no name comes to mind when you have this conversation. For me, the first name that jumps to my mind when you have this conversation is Robert Zemeckis. And I just want to scream to the heavens, Robert Zemeckis, what the fuck are you doing?
Well, I know Robert Zemeckis has to be pissed about Cameron. I mean, his jaw has to be on the floor, and he's like, he beat me. But Robert Zemeckis did some initial, I mean, he started it. I mean, he really believed in it. He just didn't achieve it fully like Cameron did.
He didn't achieve it even partially. Polar Express does not work. Beowulf does not work. Christmas Carol did not work. It does not work on that level. And it's really weird, too, because that's not a reflection of Robert Zemeckis. I consider Robert Zemeckis to be on the James Cameron, Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese level. I love his movies. I love his live-action movies. When he started doing this, he is just, as a filmmaker, strangely, I just don't think he's not shown that he's capable of doing it. Maybe it's the kind of technique or something about it does not work for him.
Number 2, Digital, I'm sorry, I was just going for it. Number 2, digital is no longer just an indie's best friend. The line between film and digital video has officially been blurred beyond the point of recognition. The new technology is no longer just the darling of the independent film movement. You see it in some of the better films of the past decade. Movies like Zodiac, Rachel Getting Married, Collateral, Avatar, and I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry.
Public Enemies.
Hold for laughs. The technology allows filmmakers more flexibility and, in many cases, a greater sense of creative freedom, and it's much less laborious to edit. In this upcoming decade, film may be obsolete. And how's that for a trend in film? The end of film itself. That's my number 2.
No better example than Zodiac. No better example. Really, when you mention all those other movies, and then you mention Zodiac, it's kind of like, wait a minute, what? Yeah. That was shot? Wait, really? It's kind of hard to believe if you want to. I know
it is. It really is.
Does it mean the death of film? Maybe. If that's the touchstone, if that's the bar, then maybe it does mean the death of film.
I think it's 70. I think it's 70 or 80% there. Yeah. And then you have the people clutching with their claws, like Tarantino, that says, if I can't shoot on film, I'm not going to shoot another movie ever.
Oh, I doubt that. He'll find a way.
Well, he said that, but
I know he said that, but he also said a lot of things too that haven't come to fruition in the last 20 years. So.
He also said he's retiring at 60. So.
Yeah, I mean,
our number 1 trend of the year, of the decade, not the year, the decade. I guess you guys can guess what this is, and it's not an involved text here, but 3D enters a new dimension. What was once a gimmicky fad is now widely accepted as the primary tool for the total immersive experience. Beyond the advancements in the technology itself, smart filmmakers have learned the proper way to utilize 3D. It's the depth more than the extreme foreground. How amazing is this technology? I think it could even add a whole 2 dimensions to a Michael Bay film. So, so this is something, when I looked at the trends, I think this is going to be the most prominent trend going forward for a while, is 3D IMAX, the movie experience part of the movie.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah,
I think it has the potential to have. It has the potential to kind of have the kind of impact that color had. It's a game changer. I mean, you really can imagine, as recently as a movie like Dark Knight, if that was shot in 3D, and not for a gimmicky reason, for an immersive type reason. Like, it immerses you in the world. You have to hand it to James Cameron. He took this technology and took it to a completely different level. I think filmmakers are salivating over this, with what he did with it. The options, the possibilities are limitless with what you can do with that type of 3D.
Yeah. And it's true for the financial investment, but they wouldn't make money off of it unless people wanted to see it. So It's the audience too. I mean, you got to be honest about it. Mm-hmm. People want to be wowed when they go to the movies. 3D is a way to do that. But just because you're in 3D, you still got to make a good movie. I mean,
that's true.
Yeah.
You really that's the key thing. You just said you still have to have a great story and everything. If you don't have that, well, what do you have then?